All right, so it's recording now, I think. I have to make sure because I've made mistakes with that before. All right. So welcome to the first Zoom meeting. And what I want to do is share my screen with you and look at the poem Metaphors, because this is really all about that. But do feel free to raise your hand or break in and ask questions. And I'll try to keep in. Okay, thank you, Gurma, for spelling your name for me. I see that in the chat. I'll try to keep up with the chat as well. So I'm going to share my screen with you and bring up Metaphors. So those of you who are on video, can you all see that now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this is just the way I started. You guys saw this already, I believe, unless it's a different version than the one I posted to Canvas. But a lot of you ask questions with your annotations, which is great. So let's start just with the word metaphors. Most of you either looked that up or asked a question about what metaphors were. So just to clarify, metaphors are comparisons that are made between two things in order for poetic effect. And there's a difference between a metaphor and a simile, and a lot of you in your definition of metaphors brought that up because you don't use like or as in a metaphor. So just to clarify what a metaphor is, because they'll come up in some of the fiction we read. A metaphor is a comparison for poetic or fiction reasons that kind of expands the meaning of something. So if I were to create a simile, I might say something like, the sun looks like an egg in the sky. But if I were going to turn that into a metaphor, I might say something like the sun cracked open on the pan of the sky, spreading its yolk. I've never said like or as, but I'm using all sorts of language that you only usually use for eggs. So most people would be able to kind of surmise that I'm comparing the sun to an egg. If I use that comparison, the sun cracked open on the pan of the sky, spreading its yolk, what kind of sun do you guys think this is? What do you see? What associations do you make with that? Because these first annotations, it's great if you're just kind of loosely associating things. And of course, that's not in this poem, but does anybody have an idea of what kind of sun that is? If I were to create that metaphor.
Full sun, no clouds, very bright.
Bright sun, because yeah, it's around, right? Did anybody see something different with that image?
Maybe like after it rains, then you'd see like the rays going all over the place.
Oh, that's cool, because there's a spreading. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other ideas? Well, this brings up something interesting about the way that imagery and metaphors in fiction and literature work, is that different people will make different associations. They'll see things differently. Usually when I ask that question, people see either a sunrise or a sunset, because that's when there's a cracking open and, you know, light goes spreading all over the place. But all of your descriptions work for a fried egg as well. So, but sometimes your metaphor can actually hint at a time of day. I always thought that that metaphor would probably be better for morning, because in America, at least, we usually have fried eggs for breakfast more often than at another time of the day. But, you know, it could be anything. But the other thing is that sometimes images in a poem or in a piece of fiction, a short story, or a novel can tell you things about the state of the person who is observing them. So if somebody said the sun looks like an egg, or the sun cracked open on the pan of the sky, spreading its yolk, what might you be able to start to think about that observer, that whoever's the speaker of that poem? We'd call that the narrator, no matter what you're analyzing. We always just call it a narrator so that we don't assume it is the actual writer of the piece, but what might we say about that character who's observing, or that narrator or author? Someone sees a sun as an egg. Is there anything we might be able to start to guess about that person?
They're hungry.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to go with that if that's the only hint at that. But if they then said, and the trees look like broccoli, and my shoe looks like a tasty steak, we have to look for patterns, because especially when we're writing essays, because one hint at something may not be enough, but patterns help us to kind of make good assertions about how you could read something. So most of you were very good at noticing that there's a lot of large images here. So we've got elephant, ponderous, even a melon strolling on two tendrils kind of is an image of something large atop small things. Loaf's big. So you guys noticed that pattern, which is great. Then the word riddle, though, is important too. Riddles are usually short little sort of tests. They're kind of cute little things that you're supposed to be able to answer. So the first riddle I think I ever heard was, what's black and white and red all over? And the answer to that is a newspaper. How many of you guys have heard that? You've heard it? Okay. Yeah, and what happens is, because we speak it out loud, we're thinking of colors, and when we say red all over, we still see the color red, but it's just a play on the fact that we pronounce R-E-A-D the same way, and that's why it's a newspaper. It's black and white. We read it all over the place. So a lot of you pointed out that, you know, if there's a riddle here, maybe there's something we have to decipher. A lot of people, or maybe even everyone, kind of said, well, why 9? And counted and found there were syllables and lines and that kind of thing that matched 9 here. So you just kind of go down and you make associations. Well, what associations do we have with 9? Ponderous is often a question people ask. That's usually something weighty, big, heavy. It's got the word ponder in it too, and ponder is deep thinking, but I don't know that that matters here. Definitely big, big things. Red fruit, ivory, fine timbers. A lot of people, some people notice that that seems to be a summary of what came before. Red fruit could be the melon, the ivory is the elephant tusks, fine timber relates to the house. But it's got this weird word O, and it kind of resembles, for me, like people calling out their wares in a marketplace, which sort of also matches the later images of wealth. Money's new minted, and this fat purse, and things like that. What associations do you guys have with this loaf's big with it? Well, first of all, what is an association? Can anybody answer that question? If you're making associations as you read, what are you doing?
A comparison.
Yeah, you're kind of, what comes to your mind when you hear this, right? And so those can be very loose at first, and that's what happens with annotations. And then you look back and go, okay, where are there some meaningful patterns here? Because some things can just be misfirings because of your own experience, or maybe they're not misfirings, but they don't work for you to write a coherent analysis of something. So I always tell a joke about associations to sort of solidify what they are. Some of you might have heard of this. There's a fair number of you, or I don't know if it's anybody here, but when I was reading the bios, there were a few people who are going to study psychology. So my sister told me this joke, and I was kind of grossed out by it, but I don't mind if you're grossed out, because maybe you'll remember at least. But anyway, so this man walks into a psychiatrist's office. And the psychiatrist says, we're going to play an association game. Well, the way we play this is that I say a word, and you have to say the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that word. And the patient says, okay, I'll do that. So the psychiatrist says, oranges. And the patient says, boobs. The psychiatrist says, melons. And the patient says, boobs. And the psychiatrist kind of scratches his chin and says, windshield wipers. And the patient says, boobs. And the psychiatrist says, okay, I get how you get boobs from oranges and melons, but how do you get that from windshield wipers? And the patient says, anyway. All right, so from that, the psychiatrist might be able to see that this person has an obsession with boobs and can think of nothing else. But that's what the association is, and it also kind of illustrates a problem we can have with reading. Like sometimes something makes such a strong association with our own personal life that we can't see the patterns that might lead to this meaning something different than what we thought. So it's why patterns are so important. Now, there's nothing wrong with you reading this poem and seeing something from your own life in it. And that's natural to literature and it makes it fun. But when it comes to doing the analysis we need to do in our class, you're going to want to find patterns and show reasonable sort of ways of reading it through those patterns. The reason we can read the alphabet at all is because we have the pattern of A always meaning a certain sound and meaning and things. My puppies are here, and so I'm just making sure they don't do any damage. So excuse me if they interrupt me, but I'm hoping they won't. All right, so with that in mind, let's get to This Loaf's Big with Its Yeasty Rising. Can any of you guys share what your associations were over that line? What'd you think of from that?
Honestly, my mind just went to something growing. Yeast rise, so it would be something growing.
Okay, who said that? I'm sorry, it's hard for me to tell because these photos are really small at this point.
That was Alex.
Alex, okay. I thought that was you, but I wasn't sure. All right, so I'm realizing that with this particular view, I'm not seeing the chat. So if anybody's joining by chat, I can't see it. So let me see. Okay, so far no comments in there, so that's all right. Can you guys see that when I pulled that up? Can you see the chat?
No.
Okay. So you see something growing and getting bigger. Did anybody else have any other associations with that line? It reminds me of a bun in the oven. Did any of you guys?
I guess just the. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I was just going to say, continuing on Alex's thought, that it makes me think of actually like you say a bun in an oven, but I think of like a turkey in the oven, kind of like the pregnancy, that there's in fact a baby growing in a belly.
I mean, that's a way of saying that somebody's pregnant, is she's got a bun in the oven. And a loaf is bread. So this is suggesting a bun in the oven, you could say. So if you went, this reminds me of a bun in the oven, that might lead you in that direction. Now, you just brought up pregnancy. How many people here thought this poem might be about pregnancy?
Definitely thought that could be about pregnancy.
Is that you, Alex?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of people in the actual annotation said, maybe this is pregnancy, but a lot of people just asked questions and they didn't get to some kind of pregnancy idea. Now, the fact that you might see pregnancy in this with the yeasty rising, the big the 9, because 9 is significant in pregnancy from 9 months. Money's new minted, and this fat purse, we get fat again. I'm a means, a stage, a cow, and calf. We have one woman here, and that is Zumana. Have you ever had babies?
No.
Okay, so this poem kind of disadvantages people who haven't had babies, I think, because if you've had it, then this line means a lot more to you. I'm a means, a stage, a cow and calf. Now, with that in mind, I think you can legitimately read this as being about pregnancy, but that doesn't mean there aren't other reasonable readings of this. So if you saw something else, that's fine. However, I would say that a lot of times students don't like it if you say, this is probably about pregnancy, but there's a wide range of how much ambiguity is in a piece of literature. So later on, you're going to read Story of an Hour, and I would say that that's a pretty limited story in terms of the possible meanings of it. And I'd say that this poem is fairly wide open, but it's, most people have pointed out that Sylvia Plath was pregnant when she wrote it, and those kinds of things have helped to kind of say, yeah, that's a reasonable way of looking at it. 9 metaphors suggest that there's more than one metaphor. So these could all be metaphors for pregnancy. I'm an elephant. I'm a ponderous house. I'm a melon. This loaf, now she's talking about her belly, if that's true. Money's new minted, and this fat purse. Again, it's me and my fat purse. But I'm a means, a stage, a cow and calf is a weird thing, because a means is just, now she realizes I'm just a method for this baby to come out in the world, because a means is a way, right? And your stage, when you're pregnant, all these people will come around and go, when's the baby due? Strangers, and strangers in elevators will ask if they can touch your belly and stuff. Suddenly, it's not about you anymore. You're just sort of the means for the drama of the pregnancy to happen. I mean, this is what happened to me. It doesn't mean it will to everybody. And then a cow and calf literally means a pregnant cow. So some of you kind of went, oh, that's where you kind of get to pregnancy. I've eaten a bag of green apples could relate to being sick. At one point, no apple was green unless it was just unripe. They've been spliced and, genetically engineered, not GMO ways, but, there's a lot of ways that we used to make new plants and things before that. But also I've seen women who were pregnant that are lumpy. So they look like big lumpy sacks in a way. When you're really far along, you can see an elbow moving or a knee. Then boarding the train, there's no getting off, suggests, okay, I can't. And some of you brought up, yeah, this was a time when you couldn't get an abortion, and it's permanent. Things are going on from here. There's nothing I can do to change my fate, if you want to say. Some people pointed out a kind of ominousness here, and other people saw this as a very happy thing. Getting on a train, maybe it depends on whether you like getting on a train or not, but there's no getting off suggests that you might want to get off, right? Yeah. So
Quick question.
Somebody have a question?
Yeah, like I was just wondering, was Sylvia Plath famous during her lifetime?
I think so. I think she was fairly. I'm not a huge Sylvia Plath follower. Like, I've only gotten halfway through her book, The Bell Jar, because it's so depressing that I don't want to read it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that she was fairly famous, and she was married to a poet when she killed herself, and he became the poet laureate of. I think he was a British poet. Anyway, he became a very famous poet, and he wrote a poem for her every year on her birthday, et cetera, which I think that book was published recently. But I'm pretty sure he was ready to leave her when she killed herself. So there was some trouble in their marriage that also contributed. Not to blame him for her suicide, but she did kill herself. I don't know if any of you guys know that. But later on in the class, we're going to talk about how to use biography to kind of read things. And you can't assume that just because that was going on in her life, that she was pregnant when she wrote this poem, that's the only possible reading of this. So what are some other possible readings of this poem? Did anybody have a different idea about what it might mean besides pregnancy? There's too many of us, huh? We're all silent because we're waiting for another person to talk. Andrew, did you have any other ideas, or was that something you read into this, the pregnancy?
Well, I thought that at one point that, I mean, she was like I was kind of had a more literal interpretation that like money's new meant that she had some money and just had means, and so she got a bunch of food, and that's for the green apples. And so
Oh
she
yeah, I
got a bunch of
remember loving
food.
your annotations on
I
that.
mean,
That's
it
funny.
was, I guess, yeah, I didn't really go that deep. Maybe I did it kind of fast and didn't really think.
No, it's good. I really look for you just writing your ideas at this point.
Mhm.
You know, you weren't writing an essay, and there's a way of looking at it and just saying it could be about that, right? There's
Yeah.
food is mentioned several times if we're looking for patterns. The other thing is it's called metaphors. So we could just say that perhaps it's hinting at pregnancy as a way of talking about what metaphors are like, because metaphors are when you take two separate things, right? In my image of the sun and the egg, those are two totally different things, and you mate them in a way that creates something new. So the baby is the metaphor, or the metaphor creates a baby or something. So you could also kind of go the other way and interpret it from the perspective of what this says about metaphors, maybe. A metaphor newly mints an idea, right? It makes a more heavy thing, I guess. Trying to do that, we go, well, then what do we do with these heavy images? Because metaphors aren't always heavy, right? But I think if you were going to write a paper and say Sylvia Plath's poem Metaphors is about her pregnancy and her maybe foreboding or fear of it or something, you could end you could go to all the images in there that could hint at pregnancy. The 9 relates to the 9 months, etc. Then at the end, you could write a conclusion where you talk about, you kind of go further out. They call it a bird's eye view, or a so what paragraph, where you then say, but the poem also gives us some insight into how metaphors are like pregnancies or something, so that you're having like a deeper analysis of the poetic forms there. Something fresh comes up. So those are just ideas. But if you're going to write an essay here, you'd want to be pointing to as much evidence as you could. The first thing you notice as you're reading metaphors is there's lots of images of large things. You could bring those up, quote them in your paper. The melon strolling on 2 tendrils kind of, for me, is the image of the woman who's really skinny and she's just got a big belly, but her legs are thin, and you just know that she's not fat, right? So you could kind of go into those things that hint at it. And then just argue, this is most likely about pregnancy. Also, if you look at it, it looks like kind of a side view of a pregnancy, doesn't it? I don't even know if that's intentional, but there's the boob, there's the belly. I don't know what this is. So anyway, our time is pretty much up for that. And I just wanted to kind of go over basically what you've done and how you would go about writing an essay as a result of the patterns you noticed. Now, you're going to write an essay this weekend that's just designed to... You're going to write an essay this weekend that's just designed... Is somebody trying to say something? I feel like we're getting some feedback here. Anyway, all that matters there is not getting necessarily a right answer, but finding patterns and asserting your viewpoint and organizing it. So you're just going to be writing an essay. It's not one of the formal essays. It's just designed for you to show me what you already know how to do. And then afterward, we'll talk about like the features of the essay. I'll give you 2 sample essays, and you're going to talk about like, which of these do I think is a better essay? So then that brings up, what is an essay? So that's what's coming up in the future. Do you guys have any questions about the course, this poem, interpreting literature, what's coming up?
I just wanted to check, so the length of that essay that this weekend, what would the...
Yeah, so I don't think you can do an adequate job on an essay without at least 5 paragraphs, because you should have more body paragraphs than an intro and conclusion. But I didn't give any length, and you'll see that the sample essays we're going to look at, I don't think they even have 5 paragraphs. So since you're asking, I would aim for at least 5 paragraphs. But it's a short essay assignment, so you don't have to go on for pages and pages. In other words, there is no limit. That's just advice.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions?
I didn't really understand what having been here for the discussion, are we still supposed to respond to it or no?
To metaphors?
Like the writing afterwards or something like that.
So if you've already done the annotating thing, I don't think there's, I haven't asked you to do anything else. Except for if you didn't show up today, I would ask you to watch the film that we just made and then write some comments about that afterward. So
okay,
you guys are going to get the credit for this discussion just by being here. So let me make sure I have everybody accurately, because I feel like somebody arrived after I took roll. We've got Andrew, Austin, Blake. Blake, are you still here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just got that.
And then we've got Girma and Zumana. Are you still here?
Yep.
Okay. And I think Ethan was here. Ethan, you're not here anymore, are you?
No, I'm still here.
Here, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Did I miss anyone?
Alex.
Alex. Okay, sorry. All right. So you'll just get credit for this, and thank you so much for coming today. I think our meeting, I guess it doesn't stop even if I only scheduled it for half an hour, which is great, but we are out of time. Unless if anybody wants to stay and ask more questions, that's fine, but I'm going to stop the recording now. So let's do that.